Greetings, fellow commanders. My name is Dark, and today I wanted to talk about 5 potential UI card changes that could be made to the Steel Division 2 beta. Steel Division 2 is going to release somewhere between June 18th and June 20th, and I wanted to talk specifically today about changes that could be made to unit card UI that would make the game a little bit better. Before I go into this, I wanted to say that I've actually really been enjoying this game. And I think that if Normandy 44 turned you off for whatever reason, that this might be a game worth trying because it definitely lives up to the quality and pedigree of the Wargame series that came before Normandy 44. Even in beta, I feel that it is a superior game. But that being said, I wanted to go over just 5 changes that I would make to the card UI to present information more clearly and help players make decisions in their deck building that will help them on the battlefield. So without further ado, I'm going to go over my 5 changes. Alright, so change number 1 that I would make to the card UI would be under the Artillery tab. There is no dispersion value on artillery pieces, on field howitzers and such. And this is a problem because it leads to situations such as what is currently present in the 14th Infantry Division, and in other divisions as well, where you can't actually compare two artillery pieces because you don't actually know what you're getting out of the two units. So we're going to compare these two units side by side. We're going to look at the, I'm just going to call it the LEFA 18M 105mm howitzer versus the SK18 100mm. Now, on paper, when you look at the stats, the LEFA has more suppression, more blast damage, the same accuracy stat, the same rate of fire, and also comes with smoke shells. In addition to this, it also has more availability, generally speaking, than the SK18. So, a player who doesn't test things and only looks at the unit card, as many people are going to do, is not going to realize that the SK18 is actually about anywhere from 20 to 40% more accurate, just depending on the shooting circumstances, compared to the LEFA. But this information isn't present anywhere in a way that is available to the player, short of actually going into the field and testing these two howitzers. And you can, if you want, test these. Grab 2 of these units, open up a battle, have the 2 side by side, and have them shoot at the same range, both in and out of corrected shot with an artillery officer, and you'll see that the SK-18 is actually a much more accurate howitzer. So, in place of the range statistic, especially for field howitzers, I think it could very easily be put a dispersion value, like an average dispersion at either 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers, to give the player a general understanding of how accurate is this howitzer going to be when firing. That way it's easier to make comparisons between these units and just be for the betterment of the game. So that's change number 1. One of the best parts of Steel Division 2 is choosing how experienced you want your units to be when you bring them in your deck. Unfortunately, there are no tooltips currently that explain what experience does, even generally, and so it's left to the player to kind of determine and feel out over the course of many games whether or not that experience is worth it. Add this into the way the new commander system works, and many players may find that they don't want to bring experienced units at all, just depending on their personal preference. So, what I would suggest is that there needs to be a tooltip, and ideally this would be a tooltip that's specific to unit types. So if we're looking at, again, the LEFA 105mm howitzer, we would want to see that at 1 veterancy star, or chevron rather, that it gets, X bonus rate of fire, X bonus aim time, as like a percentage. And what would be even cooler, although I understand that this would take some time to program and may not be practical, is that if you selected a different experience option, it would reflect in those stats at the bottom. Because the thing is, without understanding what experience actually does, beyond just a general sense, it can be very difficult to build a good deck because you aren't understanding, what am I actually getting out of getting that bonus veterancy. So for example, you can make assumptions such as with artillery, I've done a lot of testing with arty, that better experience would improve the dispersion values. And after testing, this does not appear to be the case. A vet 0, so no experience artillery piece, shooting a corrected shot alongside a 3 veteran C artillery piece, both have the same accuracy. And this is important information to make because for some people, the rate of fire will not matter as much as having multiple guns shooting, where for some people, having a very fast aiming, high rate of fire artillery piece will be very important, and so they'll go for that experience. And the same thing can be done for multiple different unit types. So again, ideally, at the very bare minimum, I would like to see, what does experience generally do somewhere in this tooltip, and then ideally, so what would be even better is if it was specific to the unit type that you were looking at, and then what would be best, would be to show, reflect what experience actually does in the unit card. That would be really cool. Anyway, that's change number 2. So tanks are a much bigger part of Steel Division 2, and something that has been changed from Normandy 44, thankfully, is that units actually have penetration values in numerical millimeters. This is kind of a first for the Wargame series, which is really cool to see actual penetration values. So kudos to the team for doing that. However, there is a problem, and that's that this penetration stat here isn't as well explained as it could be. I think that there are a couple of ways that this UI could be improved. So number one, there appears to be an artifact from either an earlier version of the game or from Normandy 44's description where AP values increase by +1 every time you get 100 meters closer to the target. Obviously, this game uses a millimeter system, so that information, it could just be an artifact of the beta, so I'm not being harsh or anything here. But that information doesn't actually tell us anything, so it needs to be changed so that when we look at the tooltip, we're actually getting the information that we need out of this description, which is how does penetration actually work. So in a general sense, we understand that the more penetration a tank has, the more likely on a hit it is to actually penetrate and damage the target. So we understand that general concept. The problem is that it is not readily apparent to most people, especially because in the past, kinetic energy penetration in this series has always been shown as the minimum penetration. So in previous games, in the Wargame series, in Steel Division Normandy 44, this penetration value that is listed is what the minimum is at maximum range. In Steel Division 2, it is the opposite. So this is the penetration at point-blank range. So there's an obvious problem here, and that's not intuitive. This isn't obvious to people picking up the game for the first time. And more to the point, it actually kind of obscures important information. With the minimum penetration system, it was easy to tell, okay, so this is the most I can expect out of my unit at maximum range. Cool. In this game, it is a lot harder to gauge how much of a chance does my tank actually stand if it's shooting at maximum range to penetrate another tank. That's pretty important information. So what I would suggest be added, because I actually like that this is kind of a minimum penetration, but what I would suggest be changed is that this stat right here be changed to max penetration, and then that way people know that this is the most amount of armor penetration that this gun is going to be able to get through at point blank range. And then there should be another stat, because there's space here in the unit card. There should be another stat that says minimum penetration, so that whenever a unit is shooting at maximum range, confusing, I know, that unit, you can see how much it's actually going to do and perform at a maximum range scenario. And then you can kind of gauge, if you're at 1 kilometer, so kind of in the middle of these two extremes, how much the tank can, or anti-tank gun for that matter, will actually perform as a unit. So that would be a UI change. I think would be very nice. Would be very good. Would be if we could see that difference. If we could see, how much our tank or anti-tank gun is going to penetrate, because there are a lot of very heavily armored tanks in this game, and knowing generally what my odds are when I'm picking an engagement is very useful information on the battlefield. So anyway, that's change number 3. Alright, now the fourth change that I'm going to suggest here is maybe a little bit more on the comprehensive side, because I think that the infantry card UI design at the moment is not exactly the best, and isn't the best at explaining how its mechanics actually work. So, there are a number of ways that this could be remedied, but first let me demonstrate what the problem is. So, here we have, we're comparing two types of Grenadier units for the 14th Infantry. Just using this deck as an example because it's my favorite deck in the game right now. That if we look at the DP-28 light machine gun, technically it's a medium or heavy machine gun, but for our purposes, compared to the light machine gun 34, there is no obvious difference between these two weapons. In fact, they have identical stats except for their rate of fire. The problem is that if the game is anything like Steel Division Normandy 44, that would make these two guns identical. And maybe that's what the game is trying to tell us. But it is less obvious because of the way that the mechanics are actually displayed here. Now, most of the time, when it comes to comparing infantry stats, we're splitting hairs. We're not going to, it's not going to change that much in an actual engagement. Whether or not to bring like assault infantry with submachine guns and grenades versus like a grenadier squad like this that has bolt rifles and a light machine gun into a city situation, for example, we know who's going to win that, and we know who's going to win in a forest. But the reason that this is a problem is that if you compare these two squads, so the Grenadiers with the DP-28 and the Grenadiers with the Light Machine Gun 34, the Grenadiers with the DP get a Panzerfaust, while the ones that only have the Light Machine Gun 34, they're not going to have a Panzerfaust at all. They have no anti-tank. These units cost the same. Now, this could be a balance issue easily. I'm not sure. But if the LMG-34 is better than the DP-28, which is what I think most people would suppose if they're familiar with World War II history at all. And I may be wrong on that, and that, debates in the comments await, but I think that information should be more obvious. I think there needs to be, an easy fix to this would be to make a kind of a damage per second stat, but kind of not called that because this is a war game and we don't use those kinds of terms here. Instead, we could use a like offensive power stat that would be kind of like, it would be a little vague, but it would also give us a better idea of like, okay, how does this gun actually perform compared to this gun in a combat situation? Because as it stands, you would assume that not having an anti-tank weapon, that the Grenadiers with the LMG-34 would perform better than the ones with the DP. But we don't know because the in-game information doesn't actually tell us anything. Where this kind of comes to a head and really just kind of is a problem is when you compare the HMG-42 and the HMG-34. When we look at these stats, for example, the heavy machine gun 42 costs 20 points more than this ersatz MG with the MG-34. The problem, of course, being that on the unit card, these two units are identical, except that the heavy machine gun has one more point of suppression. Is that a lot? I don't know. And then the rate of fire stat is higher on the HMG-42 as well, which again would suggest that because it is fast firing, that it gets more attack attempts per minute or something. But we don't know that for sure. And a very easy way to remedy this would be to simply go into the rate of fire tooltip and say that something like this allows the unit to make more attack attempts per second or per minute. That would be a very easy fix that would let us know, like, oh, hey, so this MG-42 shoots faster than the MG-34, so it's going to be able to make more attack attempts, it's going to do more damage, or suppress more. That's the kind of information that we need there. Short of actually adding any information, we could just change that tooltip to reflect that information. So In general, I would like to see a rework of infantry cards in general, where we're seeing more directly, like, what is the actual offensive output of a 7 Kar 98 rifles versus 3 G43 rifles that are semi-automatic. What is going to be the practical difference on the battlefield of these two units, and we could again reflect that with like a general like offensive power stat or something like that that kind of just shows like how much damage per minute this unit is going to do in a combat situation or something like that that is going to tell us that vital information. And then in the meantime, a very quick fix would be to just on the rate of fire stat show that like this improves the unit's attacks, attack attempts per minute or something like that. Anyway, that's change number 4. It's a big one, but I think it's also an important one. And without that, we'll move on to the last one. Now, this last change has less to do with the actual unit card itself and more with the description of an entire class. And what I'm talking about specifically is aircraft, and bombers and fighter bombers specifically. A key piece of information that is not currently available in the game is that when a fighter or when a fighter bomber or bomber drops their payload, do they get faster? And I haven't tried to test this, but it would be nice if somewhere I know that the tooltip for the aircraft tab is already pretty lengthy, but putting that tooltip somewhere to explain to people, you know, do fighter bombers and bombers actually gain speed when they drop their payload? Because on fighter bombers especially, that's very important information, because then you can have them drop their payload and then they can join like the dogfight without having to worry about like, I still have worse stats than a regular fighter. And even if it's not the case, even if fighter bombers retain their same speed, it would still be nice to get confirmation from the game in like a tooltip that is how the mechanic works, and that you can expect that out of that unit. So kind of a small change, but just add it here in this aircraft description. Maybe after all the bullet points say that like fighter bombers, or even in the fighter bomber description, which is very short, you could just say like after that first sentence that they do not gain speed and maneuverability after dropping their payload, or they do gain speed and maneuverability after dropping their payload. That would just make it very easy to see and understand, and I think that would make it a lot clearer for people when they're making decisions on whether or not they want to bring that unit type. Anyway, that's change number 5. Anyway, that wraps up this video. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope that this gets to Eugen in some capacity while we're still here in beta. I would like if even one of these changes made it into the final game, even if it wasn't at launch. I'd be pretty happy, because I think that these are all changes that don't affect gameplay but do improve the experience for the player, and helps everyone make better choices when it comes to building their decks. So there's a lot less confusion, a lot less obscurity in the UI. In general, I do think the UI is really well designed. 5 was pretty much only I could find, like, were the only things that I could find as far as the actual UI goes. When it comes to explaining these units, for the most part, I think that these are pretty well explained, and you generally get an idea of what a unit is going to do, except in the certain circumstances that I've listed here in this video. So I want to just say bravo to Eugen. I really think that Steel Division 2 is going to be a great game. I think it currently is a great game, even in beta. I'm very impressed, and I hope that we see great things for this game in the future. So anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you'll join me on the next one, and I'll see you then.